a whole lot of people doing deep sleep, yoga nidra, deep meditation, yes. But I wanted to... Beautiful to see everybody. But there's a lot of content I want to share with you, but I want to start off with just namaste. I mean, I've been travelling to India a lot. I've been 6 times in the last 2 years. And the power of namaste is just really sitting with me. In fact, it's one of the most intelligent public health initiatives that the Indians have come up with, because so much disease is actually transferred by shaking hands and kissing. It's just really true. There's so much, of public health epidemics and the flu viruses and things, shaking hands and kissing. So with a namaste, you avoid that. So just on that level, it's a very, very wise greeting to say namaste. But it's also incredibly profound. The meaning of namaste is that I honour the place in you where the entire universe resides. That place of stillness, of bliss, and that I recognise when I'm in that place in me and you're in that place in you, we are one. We are the same. And that recognition that within us is a still point. And in everybody, it's the same still point. Because stillness is stillness. If you're a rock and you're still, if you're human, you're still, if you're an animal, you're still, you're still. We can all participate in that stillness, which also permeates the whole universe. So in essence, that still point within us is the point where we connect with all that is. So in the namaste, you're actually acknowledging the divinity, the fact that everybody within them has all the universe is residing in them, and that's also in you, and it's the same. That's a spiritual and even a cultural recognition. But within Western medicine, we have a recognition of homeostasis, that your body is always trying to come into balance. And there's all these different systems that try to come into balance. There's the blood pressure and the blood sugar and body temperature. We have all these mechanisms, oxygen concentration, and all these mechanisms we're trying to adjust to the external environment to reach the still point, that point of balance. Now that's a physiological still point, so with blood pressure and blood sugar and all these things. But there's also the mental still point, which is what we're trying to achieve in yoga. I mean, that is yoga, union, to unite your whole being with the stillness of everything. That is, for me, that is yoga, union. And what we're finding, and now the yogis have known this for centuries, but what we're finding in modern psychiatry and modern medicine is when you participate, when you experience that still point, your body balances, your hormonal system balances, your cognitive processes balance. So suddenly, rather than being sort of out on a limb and off balance and then one little thing will tip you over, if you regularly find yourself fully centred and still, that gives you the greatest flexibility of response. It gives you the greatest resilience. It gives you the greatest protection against mental health or physical health. And it also gives you a sense of peace and a sense of being out more than yourself. And I think this is another point that I wanted to talk about, that in quantum physics they recognise that light is both particles and waves. So light has a wave nature, and a wave is infinite through space. It's not limited, it's not bound, it actually exists. It's unbounded and unlimited in space. But light also has a particle nature, which is totally bound and limited in space. And particles and waves are absolutely opposite manifestations of reality. Yet they're both needed to understand light. Light has both properties. And I think as human beings, we have both properties. We have our particle nature, which is our own body and our own mind and our ego and what we consider as separate from the rest of the world. And that is our everyday reality. And that's what the media tries to sell to. That is what you define by your clothes or your car or your job or your house or where you live and what you do. But it's only half the story. And if you think it's the whole story, that's the start of mental health issues. And what yoga does, it gives us that balance to say, well, if half the story is, yes, I am an individual. I'm not, in some way that I am not you. Because if I don't feed myself, you don't go hungry, I go hungry. If I don't clothe myself, you're the one that's cold, I'm cold. So I actually need to look after myself and treat myself as a separate individual. But that's only half the story. I also have to realise that in some deep sense I am you. We are the same, we are connected. And yoga gives us the direct experience of that. That's the aim of yoga, to provide that direct experience. And that's becoming more and more important as in the world today we're realising that everybody is connected, that the things you do in your daily life impact everyone else on the planet. Your carbon emissions, your decisions that you make, the products you want to buy, of the job that you do, whether you're smiling when people contact you or not. And there's this new research on connection and social networks. And by you being happy, it's actually shown that that doesn't just affect the people that are around you, but it affects their friends and their friends' friends. So 3 networks away, so people you don't even know, the friends of your friends' friends are impacted by your mood. And they've mapped that through social networks. So if you're depressed, that actually affects, if you're sick, that actually affects your friends, but also your friends' friends and their friends. This is how mood and behaviour and disease, mental disease, goes through social networks. So the more we realise that we are actually connected, the more that we participate in that oneness, in that the opposite, our wave nature, the more we can live in the world with a sense of, in fact, it's almost like the act of karma yoga. Your life becomes an act of selflessness because you're not acting out of your ego-bound identity. You're acting out of a balance between your ego identity and your timeless, universal identity. And from that, when you balance those two perspectives, you can really have you can be at peace with yourself, and that's the challenge we talked about here about the business of medicine or the business of yoga versus the practice of yoga. Well, the business of yoga represents your ego. I have to live, I have to eat, I have to put food on the table and rent that has to be paid, and that's as it should be. You have to look after your body. You have to pay the rent on your body by feeding it good food. But then there's the other side of the vocation of the connection to everything that is, and it's your spiritual nature, your Buddha nature, your yoga nature, connecting to that still point. And when you act out of the still point, it's a selfless action, because then I'm acting out of the point from you and you and you, and everybody is in my consciousness when I'm acting. And it's a truism in martial arts. They say that the greatest movement comes from the stillest point. And that's the same in martial arts, in acrobatics, in dance, that physically your stillest point is just below the navel. And that's the centre of gravity. So if you put a skewer through me here, I'd sort of be balanced and I'd spin quite happily because there'd be enough weight below than above that skewer. And that's the point that it lifts up a dancer from behind, or that an acrobat will rotate around when they're doing somersaults. Or when you're taught to juggle, if you're taught well, they say to concentrate on keeping this point really still, and that allows you to get the greatest flexibility to control the balls. Or if you're a martial artist and you're taught to kick or punch, by keeping this point still, you have the greatest ability to reach out, but then come back and be in balance. So the greatest movement comes from the stillest point. And with our mental health, that's the same thing. If we can have a mental still point and cultivate that, we get the greatest flexibility of our mind. But if we lose that, if we're acting only out of our particle nature, of our I-ness, rather than our we-ness, then what happens is you have imbalance, you have reduced flexibility. Because if I'm acting out here, I'm out of balance already, then I'm starting to try and kick or jump or somersault. I might be able to do a little bit, juggle something, but I'm not going to have the greatest stability and flexibility that I would down here. So it means you're much more prone to stress from the environment tipping you over. You're much more prone to any life circumstance throwing you off, or your emotions become much more labile. You can't come back to that point of peace and then act out of that. And I think we've all had times in our lives where we've felt stressed. I mean, modern life is full of demands. I know this weekend I've been at a scout camp with my boys in the rain. So I've only just arrived late. And yesterday I was also at a conference. I had to leave the scout camp, go to another conference, go back to the scout camp last night in the rain and come, there's lots happening in the world, and I know, everyone has demands on us all the time. And if we don't have a practice, a discipline, a direct experience of that stillness that is within us, you get thrown out and bad things happen. You get out of balance and you fall over. You have an accident. You have a emotional burst, expression that damages people, damages you, or damages relationships. And a lot of mental health issues are really just the expression of this imbalance. And that's, it's the mental health. I don't want to trivialise mental health issues because they're real and they're devastating. And in fact, they're the greatest issues that we're facing as a species. They're saying depression will be the greatest burden of disease on the planet, bigger than diabetes, bigger than cancer, bigger than starvation. Depression is looming to be the biggest burden of disease on the planet. So I don't want to trivialise that, but what I would say is that the more we can cultivate the knowledge that we're greater than ourselves, then that actually treats depression, helps to manage depression. And Parkinson's disease or any other issues which are very complex, the solutions are very simple. So it's sort of a paradox here. You have all these complex health issues with very simple solutions. And the solutions come down to how do we directly experience balance in our life. And the ancient yogis had many, many different practices. So the asana practices, which were really just to give us a stable physical seat to then give us the base for our experiencing mental stillness. And then the meditation practices, which acknowledge that the mind is almost never still. And how do we cultivate mental stillness when the mind is like a monkey on our back, trying to go wherever it wants to? So then we can just observe the mind. But by having a practice, and there's all these talks about different styles of yoga and different asana practices and pranayama practices and meditation practices and which one is suited for me. And I think it's really individual. The one that's suited for you is the one that you can do every day. And really, ultimately, the best meditation practice is any activity that you can do that's totally single-minded. So when you do it, you lose track of time. And, we talk about meditation and there's formal schools of meditation, but it's really any single-minded activity. You can meditate washing the dishes. You can meditate brushing your teeth. Knitting, sewing, dancing, playing music, gardening, walking in nature. These can all be meditative practices, or not. It really depends on where you're at in your own being. And I think to cultivate that in our life, there was a question that I think we didn't answer, but it was, how much yoga should I practice each day, and which practices? And I would suggest maybe this is an advanced practice, but try to make your whole day the practice of yoga by bringing that still point with you in all your actions, which unites your breath, your mind and your body, and it brings your whole being to whatever you're doing. The stillness within you and your ego come together. And it's when you have a separation of those that we have the start of physical disease, but also mental disease. The most fundamental law we have in Western science is the second law of thermodynamics. And that's the law that says that you can't have perpetual motion. Your machines run down, they need fuel, there's friction, there's always inefficiencies in any process. And it says that in any isolated system, entropy increases. You have disorder in any isolated system. So to be alive, we can't be an isolated system. We have to eat, we have to excrete. We have to inspire, we have to expire. We have to stay open. Our minds have to stay open if we want to learn. As soon as you have a closed mind, you'll have disorder. And that's where the dilemma is. Because if you consider yourself separate from the universe, when you're in your particle nature, in your ego nature, you've separated yourself from the rest of the universe. So by defining yourself as separate from the universe, you're going to have entropy, you're going to have disorder and disease, pain. Buddha said life is pain, life itself is the start of all illness. So while you need to identify yourself, that's the paradox of being human, you need to identify yourself as an individual being, but as soon as you do that, you're going to have disorder. You need to balance that with the recognition that you're not bounded, you're not isolated, that you're totally connected with all that is. And that total connection comes from the still point, from cultivating that stillness within. So that's the challenge of being alive on Earth. If you're here in the body, that's your task. How do you balance being a particle that's separate from the world, that's separate from the rest of the universe, but also participating in the whole universe through the stillness within. That's our challenge. I would say that is the simple solution to many mental health issues, or to many issues that we're facing as a species on the planet. Because we've overdone the ego actions. It's all about me, and it doesn't matter what happens to the environment or other people. And we have to stop doing that. And I think yoga is not just a spiritual practice for us as individuals, but it's a practice we actually have to cultivate as communities and as a species. And to recognise that everything you do literally impacts, whether it's the polar bears or the penguins or people on the other side of the world or people in the next suburb, because it does. But also, in some real sense, those people and those animals are part of you. You're connected to them. You are them, in a sense. And it's a sense that is not comprehensible. You can't capture it with your mind. You only capture it when your mind is still. In fact, when your mind is still, it disappears. Your mind can only operate when it's moving in the past or the future. When you're totally in the present, your mind suddenly goes away. And they're the moments that we try to cultivate in yoga. They're the moments where we get the direct experience, if not the knowledge. Because knowledge is itself bounded. But we can get the direct experience of stillness. And for me, that's a very simple solution to mental health issues and to wellness. And that's, I'm trying to cultivate wellness as a discipline, as an academic discipline. And it's almost unbounded, because it's not just about what you do as an individual, it's what we do as a community, it's our interaction with the environment, it's our interaction with businesses and corporate social responsibility, it's how we teach. So it's all our connections with our own purpose in life, with our own emotions, with our own self, and how we express that in the world. And I think that's a challenging thing, to really be in touch with ourselves and live from that. Now, how do we act really authentically from that deep inner well of our being? Again, that deep inner well of our being is namaste. It's that stillness. So if we're like an acrobat who's centered in their own still point, if we can act from that still point, we get the greatest flexibility, we get the greatest resilience. But also, it comes natural not to hurt other people because they are connected to us. It comes naturally not to hurt the environment because that is part of us. And then suddenly we have a consciousness shift that I think, I'm aware of, that's growing globally. There is a shift in consciousness. People are realising that we can't rely on governments and corporations which are defining their little domains as controlling the world, because they're not doing a really lousy job of it. We have to take back our power in the world, and that's a self-worth issue, because who am I to take power over the world? Wow, I'm just an individual here. But if we had that direct experience of being more than an individual, then we are empowered. And as an individual, Margaret Mead says that it's only passionate individuals that change anything. So I think we all need to become passionate individuals, connect with our centre, live from that, and we have the greatest resilience and flexibility. Namaste.